Ancient humans didn't just survive. They laughed, they played, they competed against each other, they got absolutely hammered at religious festivals and called it devotion. They made music, they told stories around fires that made children hide under their animal skin blankets. They gossiped, they gambled, they kept pets that served no practical purpose whatsoever and loved them anyway. And some of the things they did for fun are so familiar, so instantly recognizable, that they'll genuinely make you question whether humanity has changed at all, or whether we've just replaced the bonfire with a phone screen and convinced ourselves we're more sophisticated. Let's start with something that's been with humanity for so long, it might literally be hardwired into our brains. Games. Not video games, obviously, but actual physical games, with rules, competition, winners, and, because humans are humans, almost certainly trash talk. The oldest board game ever discovered is called Senet. It was found in Egypt, and the earliest examples date back to around 3100 BCE. That's over 5,000 years ago, and it wasn't just a niche hobby for one particular pharaoh with too much time on his hands. Senet boards were found in tombs, in ordinary homes, scratched into the floors of temples. Everybody played Senet. It was the ancient world's equivalent of having a deck of cards in your kitchen drawer, universally present, slightly mysterious to outsiders, and capable of causing genuine arguments between family members. Now here's where it gets interesting. Nobody is entirely sure what the exact rules of Senet were. There are theories. There are competing academic arguments. Historians have spent entire careers reconstructing the probable mechanics of this game, and the truth is, we still don't know for certain, which means that 5,000 years from now, if someone digs up your house and finds your Monopoly board, they might spend centuries arguing about what "go directly to jail" actually meant in your culture, and they would be wrong about it in ways that would horrify you, probably. But Senet wasn't alone. The royal game of dates back to around 2600 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia in what is now Iraq. It's a two-player race game with dice, or rather, with knucklebones and pyramid-shaped pieces used as dice. British Museum curator Irving Finkel actually deciphered the rules of the royal game of from a Babylonian clay tablet, and you can currently watch him play it on YouTube. A game invented 4,500 years ago, explained by a curator with spectacular hair, played today in the 21st century. That's genuinely remarkable. And then there's Mayhen, another Egyptian game, shaped like a coiled serpent, played with lion-shaped pieces and ball bearings. Nobody has figured out those rules yet. Some academics suspect we never will, which honestly feels like ancient Egyptians trolling us from beyond the grave. They built structures that took centuries to understand, and they left behind a board game specifically designed to be incomprehensible to the future. Respect, honestly. Beyond board games, ancient people played physical games with balls. The Mesoamerican ball game is one of the oldest team sports in human history, played for over 3,000 years, across civilizations in Central and South America. It involved a heavy rubber ball, large stone rings mounted on walls, and a complex set of rules that varied by region and era. Some versions of the game ended with a ritual sacrifice, though historians still debate whether it was the losing team or the winning team who got sacrificed, which tells you something about the stakes involved. Either way, it was considerably more high pressure than a Saturday morning football league. Competition wasn't limited to games. Ancient humans ran, jumped, threw things, and wrestled each other with a level of seriousness that modern competitive sports barely approach. The most famous example is the Olympic Games. The ancient Greeks started them in 776 BCE in Olympia, and they ran continuously for over 1,000 years. 1,000 years of competition. The modern Olympics have been going for about 130. We're not even in the same conversation. The events included running, wrestling, boxing, chariot racing, and the pentathlon, and the participants, for most of the games' history, competed completely naked. This is not a myth or an exaggeration. The ancient Greeks believed the naked human body was the ideal form, and that competing in clothes was somehow cheating physics. Spectators watched, judges watched, city-states sent their champions to compete naked in front of thousands of people, and nobody thought this was unusual. It was simply Tuesday. The winner received an olive wreath. That was it. No gold medal, no sponsorship deal, no energy drink endorsement, just a wreath of leaves and the eternal glory of your city-state. But the glory was real. Olympic victors were celebrated like gods. Poets wrote odes about them. Statues were built in their honor. Some returned home to find their city had literally knocked down part of its own wall to let them in, because a gate, apparently, was not a grand enough entrance for someone who had won the discus throw. The wall was demolished to let one man walk through. That is the level of respect an ancient athlete could command, and it is absolutely unhinged, and I love it. Wrestling in ancient Egypt was equally serious. There are depictions of wrestling matches carved into the walls of tombs in Beni Hassan, dating to around 2000 BCE. Hundreds of individual positions and moves are illustrated in extraordinary detail. Hip throws, leg sweeps, takedowns, ground control, ancient wrestling manuals essentially carved permanently into stone, and the techniques shown would be instantly recognizable to any modern wrestler. The fundamentals of the sport haven't changed in 4,000 years. The human body works the same way it always did, and people figured out how to leverage it against another human body roughly 4 millennia ago and never looked back. Ancient Rome had chariot racing, which was the Formula One of the ancient world, except instead of technical disqualifications and strategic pit stops, the primary danger was being crushed under the wheels of the cart behind you while the crowd screamed with delight. The Circus Maximus in Rome could hold up to 250,000 spectators. For context, that's larger than any sports venue on Earth today. 250,000 people packed into one arena to watch men in chariots hurtle around a track at speeds that had no business existing in the ancient world, with the very real possibility of a catastrophic crash on every corner. Chariot racing teams had colors: blue, green, red, white. And fans were not casual about their allegiances. There were riots, actual, serious city destabilizing riots, over chariot racing results. Fans attacked each other. Supporters of different teams refused to eat together, marry into each other's families, or even live in the same neighborhoods. Modern football hooliganism has nothing on ancient chariot racing fandom. These people were dedicated in ways that modern sports marketing teams can only dream of. All of this physical activity leads us, inevitably, to something ancient humans also did with enormous commitment after a long day of competing, working, hunting, farming, or simply existing. They drank. Ancient humans drank a lot, and they didn't drink water, mostly because water in the ancient world was frequently a death sentence. The rivers were contaminated. The wells were unreliable. Germ theory wouldn't be invented for a few more millennia, but ancient people had figured out through trial and fatal error that drinking from certain sources tended to end badly, so they drank fermented things instead. Beer is one of the oldest beverages in human history, and there is a genuine academic debate, a real peer-reviewed, tenure-affecting academic debate, about whether humans started farming grain to make bread or to make beer. The evidence is frustratingly unclear. What we know for certain is that by 4000 BCE, Sumerians in Mesopotamia were drinking beer through long straws directly from large communal vessels to filter out the grain and chaff floating on top. Communal straws, shared with whoever was around. The ancient world's take on a drinks party was considerably less hygienic than anything a modern health inspector would approve. They also wrote poems about beer. The hymn to Ninkasi, a Sumerian poem from around 1800 BCE, is essentially a complete brewing recipe written as religious verse. It describes the process step by step, wrapped in praise for Ninkasi, the goddess of alcohol. The Sumerians had a goddess specifically dedicated to beer. She had a temple. People worshipped her. The priests almost certainly needed to regularly taste the sacred offerings to ensure quality control. This was their job, officially, written on a clay tablet. Wine was equally important across the ancient Mediterranean. Greek symposia, which literally means drinking together, were formal social events where men gathered to drink wine, listen to music, debate philosophy, and recite poetry. These were not casual excuses to get drunk. They were considered culturally vital. The symposium was where ideas were exchanged, alliances formed, and young men educated in the customs and values of their society. The wine was always diluted with water. Drinking wine unmixed was considered barbaric. You'd be looked down upon. You'd be the ancient equivalent of someone who pours the whole bottle directly into a pint glass at a dinner party and then immediately starts having opinions about politics at full volume. The Greeks would have been horrified. They had standards. Admittedly, those standards coexisted with regularly competing naked in public and sacrificing animals to gods made of marble, but still, standards. And what did they do at these drinking gatherings? They told stories. Storytelling is not a modern invention. It's not even ancient. It's prehistoric. Humans have been telling each other stories for as long as we can trace human behavior. The cave paintings at Lascaux in France, dated to approximately 17,000 years ago, aren't just drawings. Researchers have found that many of the animals appear depicted in sequential poses, essentially frames of animation frozen in stone. The cave wasn't just a gallery, it was possibly a performance space where, by firelight, flickering shadows brought the painted animals to life, and someone stood in front of them and narrated. The first campfire was also, almost certainly, the first cinema. Oral storytelling cultures preserved history, mythology, moral codes, practical knowledge, and entertainment across generations, long before anyone invented writing. The Iliad and the Odyssey, two of the most influential works of literature in Western history, existed for centuries as spoken, performed, memorized epics before Homer wrote them down. Bards traveled from settlement to settlement carrying entire stories in their heads, adapting them for different audiences, adding local color, emphasizing the parts that got the best reaction, quietly removing the parts that fell flat. This is exactly what a content creator does today. Same job, different format, identical underlying instinct, and the stories they told were not sanitized. Ancient myths are full of violence, betrayal, divine dysfunction, deeply questionable moral decisions, and protagonists who do genuinely terrible things and are somehow still framed as heroes. These weren't gentle tales designed to comfort people. They were designed to provoke, disturb, delight, and make you think. They were the ancient world's version of prestige drama, designed specifically to be discussed, argued about, and revisited. Ancient humans didn't only consume stories, they created, they sang, they played instruments, they danced. The oldest known musical instruments are bone flutes, fragments of flutes made from vulture wing bone and mammoth ivory found in caves in what is now Germany have been dated to over 40,000 years ago. 40,000 years. Modern humans as a species have existed for perhaps 300,000 years. So for more than 10% of our entire existence on this planet, we have been deliberately making music. Let that sink in for a moment. Before agriculture, before cities, before writing, metal tools, pottery, the wheel, or any form of organized trade, before almost everything we associate with civilization, humans were sitting in caves, carefully carving precise holes into bird bones at specific intervals, and blowing into them to produce notes that they found pleasing. Why? Because it felt good. Because music does something to the human brain that neuroscience still hasn't fully explained. Because someone, 40,000 years ago, figured out that a particular sound made other people in the group feel something. Calm, energized, connected, emotional, and decided that was worth the considerable effort of making the instrument in the first place. Ancient Egypt had full orchestras with harps, lutes, flutes, drums, clappers, and sistrum rattles. Ancient Greek music theory was so sophisticated, covering scales, modes, mathematical ratios between notes, that European scholars of the Renaissance were still rediscovering it centuries after the civilization had ended. The Romans had theater organs powered by water pressure, called hydraulis, capable of producing sounds loud enough to fill enormous public spaces. There are written accounts of Roman concert audiences so moved by a performance that they wept openly, or erupted into spontaneous cheering, or threw things at the stage when they disapproved. That last tradition has largely been retired from modern concert venues. Largely, dancing accompanied music at every level of ancient society, from elaborate court performances in Egypt to ecstatic religious dancing in ancient Greece dedicated to Dionysus, god of wine and theater, where participants danced themselves into altered states of consciousness and considered this a form of spiritual experience, which is a remarkably sophisticated understanding of what music and movement can do to a human brain, arrived at entirely without neuroscience. Ancient humans also played, not just in competitions, but genuinely, freely, without purpose, for the simple joy of it. Children's toys have been found in archaeological sites across the world and across thousands of years. Clay animals with movable, articulated limbs in ancient Egypt, spinning tops in the Indus Valley civilization, miniature carts, and human figurines in ancient Mesopotamia. Greek children had dolls made of terracotta with jointed arms and legs. Roman children had wooden swords, balls, hoops, and pull-along toys. Some of these toys are so similar to modern ones that if you painted them bright colors and put them on a shelf in a toy shop, nobody would look twice. The fundamental design of a child's toy, small, tactile, imaginative, capable of being picked up in one hand, has not changed in 4,000 years because children have not changed in 4,000 years. They want the same things. They always have. One particularly charming find from ancient Greece: terracotta pigs on wheels. Small ceramic pigs, realistically shaped, with little wheels on their feet so a child could roll them across a floor. 2,500 years old. Absolutely identical in concept to every plastic toy vehicle ever sold at the checkout counter of a supermarket. A child in ancient Athens rolled a pig across the floor and made the same sound effects as a child today rolls a car across a kitchen table. Some things are simply human constants. Adults played with animals. Pet keeping is ancient. Dogs were domesticated somewhere between 15 and 40,000 years ago, and from very early on, they weren't purely working animals. They were companions. Ancient Egyptian art consistently shows dogs resting at their owner's feet. Ancient Roman homes had mosaics reading Cave Canem, beware of the dog, which implies not just a guard animal, but a dog that wandered freely through the house and might surprise visiting guests who weren't paying attention. Romans also kept cats, songbirds in elaborate cages, monkeys trained to perform tricks, tamed deer in garden enclosures, and ornamental fish in ponds that were maintained with obsessive care. One Roman writer complained bitterly that his neighbor spent more time talking affectionately to his fish than he did to his wife, which, depending entirely on the wife and the fish, may have been a perfectly rational allocation of emotional energy. Ancient humans traveled, not just for trade, conquest, or necessity, but for pleasure, for tourism, for the experience of seeing something impressive and being able to tell other people you'd seen it. The ancient Greeks and Romans traveled to see monuments, wonders, and famous sights. They left graffiti on everything they visited. There is actual ancient graffiti, carved into stone, written in Greek and Latin, on Egyptian temples, on the legs of giant statues, on the walls of famous buildings, that essentially says, "I was here, and this was magnificent," or in some cases, just a name and a date. The tourist instinct is not new. It is as old as the ability to travel and the desire to prove you did it. Hadrian, the Roman emperor, visited Egypt in 130 CE specifically to climb the Colossus of Memnon, a massive ancient statue that, when the stone heated at sunrise and thermally cracked, reportedly produced a haunting musical tone. Locals claimed it was the statue singing. Hadrian got up before dawn, stood in the Egyptian desert in full imperial dignity, and waited for a stone sculpture to make a noise. He was so moved when it did that he had a poem commemorating the experience carved into the statue's leg. A Roman emperor writing fan poetry about a statue's sunrise sound effect. In Egypt, pilgrimages combined religious devotion with tourism in ways ancient and modern humans would both recognize instantly. People traveled enormous distances to visit oracles, healing temples, and sacred sites, mixing genuine spiritual purpose with the secondary motivation of seeing new places, eating different food, and acquiring the ancient equivalent of souvenirs to bring home. And then there was theater. Ancient Greek theater didn't just invent tragedy and comedy as genres, it invented the entire concept of formal theatrical performance as a civic, social, and spiritual event. The theater of Dionysus in Athens held between 14 and 17,000 people. These weren't niche cultural events for intellectuals. The entire city attended. Performances ran for days as part of religious festivals. There were awards for best play, best actor, best producer, voted on by the audience. Ancient Greek theater had an awards season. The plays covered everything human, war and its aftermath, love and its betrayal, justice and its failures, divine cruelty and human endurance. Comedy plays made fun of real, living, named politicians to their faces, in front of the entire city, with everyone laughing. Aristophanes wrote a comedy directly mocking Socrates, portraying him as an absurd, pretentious windbag who ran an institution called the Thinkery for producing useless philosophers. Socrates was in the audience. He stood up during the performance so everyone could see who was being lampooned. He either had the most remarkable self-confidence in the ancient world or a very dark sense of humor about himself. Given what we know about Socrates, probably both. Roman theater expanded into spectacle on a scale that requires a moment to fully absorb. The Romans occasionally flooded entire arenas, purpose-built lake venues, and sometimes even the Colosseum itself, to stage full naval battles called naumachia. Real ships, real water. Thousands of condemned prisoners or professional fighters recreating famous historical sea battles for the entertainment of audiences who had paid for a good seat. The logistics of filling an arena with enough water to float warships, staging a coherent battle narrative, and then draining the whole thing again represent an engineering and organizational effort that is genuinely staggering. And they did it for fun, for the crowd, because the crowd wanted to see it and the emperors wanted to give it to them. But underneath all of this, the games, the sports, the drinking, the music, the theater, the tourism, the toys, the pets, there is one thing that ties ancient fun to modern fun more completely than any specific activity. Ancient humans sought connection. Every single one of these activities, when you trace it back, is fundamentally about being with other people, sharing an experience, feeling something together. A race isn't just about running, it's about watching someone run and feeling invested in the outcome. A story isn't just words, it's an invitation into someone else's imagination. A board game isn't just about winning, it's about the tension, the rivalry, the moment when everything is on the line and you look across the table at another person and something passes between you. The person who carved a flute from vulture bone 40,000 years ago in a cave with tools made of stone wasn't just making noise. They were making a sound that said, "I am here, come closer. Let us be somewhere together away from the dark and the cold, just for a while." That is what fun has always been, across every civilization, every era, every level of technological sophistication. Not an escape from life, but a different way of being fully alive inside it. A way of insisting, loudly, defiantly, joyfully, that survival is not enough, that the human animal needs more than food, shelter, and safety, that we need games and music and stories and laughter and the warmth of other people sharing an experience and feeling it alongside us. Ancient humans knew They built racetracks and amphitheaters and symposia and campfires specifically to keep reminding themselves of it, and they passed that knowledge down through every generation, across every civilization, through every collapse and rebirth of culture, until it reached us, which is why right now, today, there are people playing board games at kitchen tables and laughing at something stupid that happened on the third turn. There are runners crossing finish lines with their arms in the air for no reason, except that they set a goal and reached it. There are musicians staying up far too late because the song isn't finished yet, and it almost is, and they can feel it. There are storytellers talking to cameras, editing for hours, uploading something into the world, and hoping that somewhere out there, someone will stop scrolling for a moment and feel something. Same species, same instinct, same deep and irrational need to make the moment mean something. If a Sumerian beer brewer, a naked Greek Olympian, a Roman chariot fan, and an Egyptian sonnet champion could somehow see what we've built with 40,000 years of accumulated human creativity and joy, they'd probably look at it all, nod slowly, and ask where the wine is, and then they'd sit down right next to you and watch.